So again, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this year's Immigrant Day of Digital Action. In our first panel for the day, it has been an exciting morning of dance and solidarity and really touching words of wisdom from our speakers. But right now we have an urgent, relevant conversation to start off today's proceedings. And our panel is going to tackle the subject of the upcoming national election in the midst of a major public health crisis that has upended the United States and the world. I know that questions are swirling in your minds for our audience right now about what's going to happen in November 2020. How do we exercise our voting rights and preserve democracy while battling a pandemic and dealing with a long drawn out crisis in Washington, D.C. So before we get to it, I want to introduce to you our esteemed panel this morning. For details about their biographies, please go to your Immigrant Day packet. Because of their long history of work, activism, and leadership in this country, their bios are pretty long, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time for that. But before I start, I want to introduce our first panelist, Angelica Salas, who needs no further introduction, is the Executive Director at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. Angelica is a national leader in immigration and has spearheaded several ambitious campaigns locally, statewide, and nationally, including helping win in-state tuition for undocumented immigrant students, helping to establish day labor job centers that have served as a model for the country, among other great accomplishments. She is a leading spokesperson on federal immigration policy and is a proud daughter of immigrants. Our other speaker is Jared Rivera, who currently works as political director at SEIU 2015. Jared has more than 2 decades of experience in community and political organizing, including stints with Hillary for America, the largest local union in the country, SEIU, as political coordinator for SEIU California, and formerly the executive director of LA Voice, a PICO affiliate in Los Angeles, in the greater Los Angeles area. Our other speaker is Melissa Romero. She is the legislative affairs manager of the California League of Conservation Voters. In this role, Melissa represents the organization in the state's capital, lobbying for strong environmental and democratic work, and works with partner organizations in advancing priority legislation. Last but not the least is Mindy Romero. Are you with us, Mindy?
Yes, Mindy's on.
Perfect. Thank you, Mindy. Mindy Romero is the founder and director of the California Civic Engagement Project at the University of Southern California Saul Price School of Public Policy in Sacramento. Romero is a political sociologist and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California, Davis. Her research focuses on political behavior and race ethnicity and seeks to explain patterns of voting and political underrepresentation, particularly among communities of color in California and the US. So there you go, everybody. That is our panel for this morning. And to start us off, I would like to call on Angelica Salas, who is going to talk to us about what is at stake in California and the country, especially now with the recent announcement of an all-ballot election. What is changing and how do we respond? As well as what is your broad message to our audience today listening and those who will actually listen after this, because this is being recorded and will be shared live later. Please take it away, Angelica.
Sure, Cynthia. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here today. I just really want to say that it is so important for me today to just let you know how important it is that you're gathered together in order to fight for justice. And I'm going to give you a presentation, but I do really want to say it was so lovely to see all our colleagues today joining in unison to fight for the rights of immigrants. And so what I wanted to do today is to talk about our civic engagement. and how important it is in this moment to really understand what is at stake in terms of our elections, but also in terms of everything that each and every one of you who's listening has actually won. So when we're talking about building power for our communities, it's about building power to win more of what we deserve and our families deserve, especially in this moment, which is so difficult for them. But it is also a moment in which we want to defend everything that we've actually accomplished so far. So the first thing I want to introduce you to very quickly is to the Chirla's Immigrant Political Power Project, which is both a C3 and a C4 component. And our purpose is to activate new voters, Latinos, and when I say new American voters, that's immigrant voters, who this is the first time maybe that they're participating in elections, or maybe this is the second or third time, but they are new American voters. I'm a new American voter, I'm an immigrant, and I started voting sometime in 2008. So I remember, you know, first taking the oath and then also then casting a ballot, and how important it is, but also how sometimes you really need somebody to support you in that whole process. And so it also goes, focuses on low propensity Latino voters and other low propensity voters who often are discarded from by many of the by the campaigns. They never call you, they don't send you any mail, they don't send anything to you, so then you don't even know that an election is happening. So it's important to really connect with those voters. So Chirla actually in California in 2018 was able to turn out over 253,000 of these voters and to cast their election. In 2020, our goal is to connect with over 350,000 folks and make sure that they actually turn out to vote. And I want to tell you, what we know is that if you, each one of you, is actually engaged in this work because you are a trusted messenger and are engaging in this kind of get out the vote, your work can actually turn out higher percentage of turnout than even state national elections. I also just want to say in this slide, it's so important that we understand that we are not voting at the rates that are in terms of our corresponded to our population. So those who are voting, for example, 45% Latino adult citizens are the only ones who are voting, 53% of Asian adult citizens, 57% of African adult citizens, and then those who are casting a higher rate of participation or voting are non-Hispanic white adult citizens. And that's and so the state's likely voter population is disproportionately white, affluent, older. And so we need to make sure that our electorate is representative of the people who live in California. And so the stakes are high. I don't need to tell you, you are the leaders that are working on this day in and day out. But I just need to say the stakes are high at the federal level, at the national level, because most of the things that have happened, especially at the administrative level, have happened through executive orders, administrative actions, and the latest proclamation to bar immigration. It is important for me to say, no law has passed. Everything has actually happened through these actions that have hurt and continue to hurt our families. And I cannot obviously forget the total number of deaths that have happened because of the inaction and cruelty and just, there are no adjectives to quite describe what has happened. Over 80,000 people have died in the United States. Many of them are people of color, a majority African-American in some states, but also here in our state, the climbing number of deaths are of Black and brown individuals. And then obviously the stakes of DACA, TPS, our census, we still have to remember there is a Muslim and refugee ban, the family separation, all this we can fight through civic engagement. And also not to forget Trump's Supreme Court, DACA, we are every day waiting to hear what the Supreme Court's decision is going to be on the fate of DACA, but most importantly on the fate of the human beings who are right now protected, who actually can have a livelihood because of DACA. And we're here on Immigrant Day, and I just want to say thank you to CIPC for their leadership, for Cynthia, for all the team in terms of all the work that we have all collectively done, but also through their leadership around a lot of our One California Coalition campaign. Our $45 million for legal services, $20 million for one-time for DACA renewal fees, the passage of the California Values Act. In California, we have our Attorney General defending us, and just recently, the $75 million for the undocumented fund for households affected by COVID-19. And so California is so opposite of what's actually happening at the federal level, fighting it, fighting the administration, but that also depends, how we're able to do that depends on our continuing participation. And that participation also happens at the local level. So it's not just national, federal, and state. I always say our state legislature, our state and our federal members of Congress, they're right in our backyard. So all of this work boils down to defending what we've won and ensuring that we move forward faster on the things that we need at the local level. And that's why organizing on the ground is so critical. Because organizing on the ground really does create just communities that then are able to fight at all the different levels of government. And of course, in solidarity and with intersectionality, which means that we are not just fighting for immigrant rights, but immigrant rights is the rights of individuals in the workplace, is the fight for climate change, is the fight for criminal justice reform. So doing that at the local, state, and national level. And so last to say, and this is so critical, is to talk about 2020. Now 2020, because of COVID-19, our elections are changing. And so what's going to happen is majority of individuals are going to get their information through mail-in ballots. There will also be voting centers available, but you become so critical in this moment in order to make sure that our communities are voting. And so this, when I talk about civic engagement, I'm saying we have to win the census 2020. So, you know, a lot of you are working on that right now. We have to make sure our folks are filling out those forms. In certain communities, especially in certain neighborhoods, the performance rate of our and send-in rate is too low in comparison to the nation and the state. And so we just have to make sure that we continue sending that message. That's our civic engagement message. And then number two, in our elections, we want elections that are safe for our folks and for the people who are helping us with elections, but also that are simple, that we don't create barriers that then do not move on the numbers that I showed earlier, but instead actually move in a direction that, that does not help our communities. And so in November elections, what's at stake? Schools and communities first. I showed you the list of all that we have won in terms of advancements in the budget that can be wiped out. And so it's so critical that we together actually identify revenue sources and push our government to move on those revenue sources in order to continue to support the people in need, but also individuals that right now are essential workers who, if we don't work on this budget advocacy the way we need to, or in the elections, move on schools and communities first and other revenue measures, we're gonna see the very people who got us through this pandemic, the essential workers, who are gonna be hurt the most. We have to elect a new president that respects us, that represents us, and does not continue to harm our communities and separate families. And we have to continue to fight in the elections for a California for all, for representatives and for issues that actually stand on behalf of a pro-immigrant agenda. My last piece here is going to be, well, maybe in terms of what I wanted just to say to you, instead of providing you the voter survey. I'm learning how to do all this shared screen. So I'm just going to say to you that one of the things that's so important is what your role is in actually helping with elections. So this was a survey that we did of our members around voting and sort of some of the challenges faced in COVID-19. And that is that what we're seeing is that individuals are lacking the knowledge, not only of where to go to vote, but even if there are elections. And so you become so critical, but how can you actually help out? And I'm gonna give you a couple of, as I close, of action steps. And so the first thing is that you need to be in conversation with voters this November. People will respond, they said, to reminder phone calls. If you're calling, we don't know what the situation is going to be, but please call, connect with people, because they do need a reminder phone call in order to turn out. I'm not going to go through all that you see in front of you in the screen, but I do want you to know that a lot of individuals don't know when election day is. They also prefer to do their voting in person. And so when I say we need elections that are safe and simple, we have to understand that for a lot of folks, the simple nature of voting means going and placing a vote. So we're going to have to work with our community in helping them on vote by mail, but also helping them find these vote centers and getting them to vote early in order for them to participate. The stakes are high at the national level, the stakes are high at the state level and at the local level, and we need to engage. And with that, I'm just going to go back to Cynthia, and thank you so much for just this wonderful day, and for all of you, all the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Can you hear me?
I can.
My video somehow disappeared, but I'm going to keep talking. The perils of testing a new system. We'll go back to this to Angelica later as we keep going. But right now, I'm going to move to Jared, and Jared, maybe ask you to address, for example, what are some of your concerns about the election, as well as how specifically has labor been impacted by the crisis, and what is your plan to engage, among other things?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Carmen and Almas for the invitation to be here today. Our union has worked with CIPC for many years, so it's a real honor to be here. For those who do not know me or our union, I'm the political director with SEIU 2015. We're the largest local union in the state of California. We represent about 400,000 workers. These are both in-home care workers and also workers in nursing homes. We are a largely organization of women of color, low-income women, large immigrant population, a large number of mixed status families. So we are dealing with all of the same issues that all of us here are dealing with. The things that Angelica talked about that are at stake for us too. The real difference now is in light of COVID, our members are on the front lines and they're at risk. Particularly, as many of you may know, the situation in nursing homes is just unbelievable. Our members are going into nursing homes every day. They do not have the right protective gear. They're not paid enough at nursing homes to only have one job. So often they're working one shift for 3 hours and then they're going to another nursing home. Again, no gear. So they're at risk of contracting the virus or spreading the virus in many different places. So there's been a total lack of response from the federal government, as we all know. So that's in addition to all the things that we had to worry about. That's what's on the table right now. Not to mention the fact that during this administration and on the labor front, the last 4 years, there have been attack after attack on the rights of working people to form unions. And I don't know that we could sustain another 4 years, particularly with the Supreme Court, that we've kind of held on. We've been able to kind of continue to maintain our organization. But another 4 years of this administration, it's not a stretch to say that collective bargaining rights, as we've known it in this country, would just really not exist. So we have our work cut out for us. I'm going to try to share my screen and see if I can do this.
Works.
Does it work? You guys can see it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to go to full screen here, but okay, I'll just, so I think that what I really wanted to talk about though is as we look ahead to 2020, it's the lessons that we learned just 2 years ago in 2018 that I think are the most important. I don't know if as a movement, we really think about, what we were able to do in 2018. It was a pretty remarkable thing that I'm not sure that we really kind of grasp. And so it's something that I want to remind our membership and folks that we work with. But 2018 wasn't just any election. I've worked in politics for a number of years. I have never seen the collaboration on the ground that we had for a midterm election that I saw last, 2 years ago in 2018. I know a lot of groups on this call were part of this. People were writing postcards, they were knocking on doors, they were making phone calls. There was collaboration across our movement that I have never seen in my time working in politics. And it made a difference. So what you can see here is that 2018 was the highest turnout in a midterm election in about 100 years. You got to go all the way back to 1914 to see the same level of participation in a midterm election. And so voter participation was up, really high. And so when we see a lot of the changes that we had, it's because of this. It's because, people participated, people got out there, and we saw all kinds of gains because of that. People will remember, that President Obama, after 2008, lost a ton of seats. He lost control of Congress. It really stifled what he was able to do with his administration. When you go back and you look at this, it's because there was incredibly low voter participation in those years. And so we knew that the challenge in 2018 was to go out and vote, and we did it. We know what that meant in California. This is Orange County, which is just an amazing thing. I mean, I never thought I would live to see a time when all of Orange County would be represented by Democrats, frankly. And there were 7 seats that we flipped across the state of California. Our union was invested pretty heavily in many of these districts. Really incredible. We saw that that when voter participation rise, all of these wins happen. So just as a very basic point, when we show up and vote, we win. There are more people, there are more voters in this country that support all of the ideas that we support: immigrant rights, access to healthcare, quality education. There's just more of us. And when voter participation is high, as we've seen in certain elections, it bears the fruits. When voter participation is low, it doesn't, which is why Republicans spend so much time limiting access to voting and making it much more difficult, because they know that there are more voters who share these values in this country than not. So the raw vote margin was about, the difference between Democrat and Republican votes in 2018 was about 8.1%. That's the largest differential between two parties in modern times. I mean, you go back and you look at huge sweeping turnouts in 94, 2006, 2010. They weren't the same as what we saw in 2018. It really was a wave election. And what I know that people, all of us, are very distrustful of polls after what happened in 2016. But it always reminds myself that going into 2018, all of the polling data told us it was going to be a huge turnout. They told us it was going to be a big wave election. These were the polls leading into the last week or so before the election. You can see here that they're pretty much spot on. So I'm not trying to give people complacency. We shouldn't look at any polls right now and think that our job is not done, but we should feel like the wind is at our back. And so really it's just about making sure our folks go out and they vote. But so that's kind of the good news. The good news is that there's a lot of things that point to a lot of successes that we had in 2018. There's a lot of momentum, but that does not indicate that we will have success in 2020. So I don't want to give people a false sense of confidence. One of the elections that we are weighing in right now is a special election in Congressional District 25. So this is the seat that Katie Hill won in 2018. After some awful photos were leaked of her online, she decided to step down. So they're doing a special election. The last day to mail in your ballot is tomorrow. So we have a large membership in this district. We did a lot of work at this in 2018. But this is an interesting test here because this is all mail-in ballots for this election, and it's a special election. And so one of the things that, similar to what Angelica was saying, voting is a habit. If everybody here with your screens, I bet you if you turned around your screen and you showed me your bed right now, half of you would have made your bed this morning, half of you would have not made your bed this morning. I'm not going to tell you whether or not my bed is made, but there's just some of us that wake up, that's the first thing that we do. Some of us, we wake up early, we go to the gym, that, you know, that it's easy as anything to get out of bed. For some of us, it's not the same, it's not that easy. Voting is a similar thing. Voting is a muscle that we have to exercise. So you can see right now, this was as of a couple days ago, 27% of the voters in this district had turned in their ballots for this special election. So let's see who's turning in their ballots. Republicans are outpacing greatly Democrats in this election right now, or as of a couple days ago, 38% to 25%. I would say this does not bode well for the Democratic candidate, Christy Smith. But if you look at like the age groups, 48% of voters 65 and over had turned in their elections already. If you look at white folks, 32%, whereas Latinos, 16%. So this is something that that scares me a little bit, because if we get to November and it is a male-only election, all male, and our union is really advocating to make sure that we also have voting places in addition to mail-in ballots. But if there are changes to this election, that messes up things, right? And people, like Angelica said, people are not going to be used to it. It's going to be a new experience for them. And so the momentum that we may have could be washed away by people having a different experience when they go into vote. So just to really echo what Angelica said, the greatest indicator, all the research says the same thing. The greatest indicator about whether somebody votes or not is whether somebody that they know and they trust remind them to vote. So you are going to be the best educators, the best motivators to vote with your friends and with your families and with the membership of your organization. They're all going to be the best in their neighborhoods and in their churches, at their jobs, everything else, that we're going to have to put in the same effort that we did in 2018. And I think if we can do that and we don't let up, we could really reverse a lot of these attacks that we've seen. But again, the election that we have right now, this special election, should be a sobering reminder to us that our work is cut out for us. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to see if I can unshare my screen again.
Thank you so much, Jared and Angelica, for setting up that big but very urgent picture around what is at stake in these coming elections. I'm going to move us to Melissa. Melissa, having heard the urgency of participation, of understanding what is critical and necessary for people to not only exercise their voting rights, but also really do what's necessary to get our communities out there voting. What is the League of Conservation Voters doing, and group, what are your members doing to engage the voters in an optimal manner?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you guys for inviting me to this space. I'm really just honored to be invited here and to speak with such a group of powerful individuals. So thank you. Again, my name is Melissa. I'm with the California League of Conservation Voters. First and foremost, CLCV is an environmental organization, but we know that who is in office determines what environmental policies actually get passed. So we need clean air, we need clean water, we need clean energy, and the people that are being voted into office are really the key holders of those policies. So right now, what we are working on doing is really pushing for mandating in-person voting locations, because right now our state leaders are determining what to do to change things in order to protect people's health during the November 3rd general election. One of those things that we saw recently was the governor's executive action last Friday. So just a few days ago, the governor signed an executive order mandating that every voter gets a vote by mail ballot. And while that's the first step, we really see that, what is important as well is to make sure that in-person voting locations are available to people that are going to ensure the voters and the poll workers' safety and health, that also doesn't require people to have to decide between their health and their right to vote, because that right to vote is so sacred and so important, and no one should feel threatened or unsafe in exercising that right. And so what we are asking for, what we're prioritizing right now and asking our state leaders is that we have a mandate for in-person voting. We want, no reduction in in-person voting locations, because that's going to lead to lines, it's going to lead to crowds. And if somebody is walking up to a big line, they might turn away. So we really want to make sure that we're maximizing voter access and voter safety in those situations. We want to make sure that drop boxes are available for people to drop off their mail ballots. Not everyone has access that is consistent to mail pickup, and we recognize that, and people need to have ballot drop-off locations that are not replacing the voting centers or the polling places, but are in addition to. We also are advocating for early voting. So early voting can help to make sure that people with different work schedules can get in earlier. People who have different days off of the week, because the election is typically on a Tuesday. Some people work all day Tuesday. And so making sure that early voting is available for people so that those crowds and those lines get dispersed over more days, as well as education and outreach. This is really, really key, this piece, because people need to know where they can go vote. They need to know what their options are. They need to know so that they can tell their family and their friends that you need to update your voter registration, because a lot of folks are going to get a mail ballot not in their preferred language. And we need to make sure that people know what to do ahead of time to make sure that they're going to update their address, update their preferred language. For the folks who've never voted by mail before, that they know what to do, how to fill it out, that there is not a stamp required on the envelope. And just, making sure that people know any changes to their typical voting location, because there may be changes. People also need to know their rights to voting. So that education and outreach, both at the state and the local level, is really, really key. And that's where a lot of our organizations are also going to step in to make sure our communities, our constituents understand those things. We need the governor and the legislature to take action. So the governor, like I mentioned, just signed an executive order requiring every voter get a vote by mail ballot. Great first step. We got to make sure by May 30th, which is what the deadline the governor has set to determine how to implement in-person voting, we need to make sure that all of your needs are considered. We need to make sure that people with disabilities, we need to make sure that people who are non-English speakers, we need to make sure that people who are homeless, people who may be evicted after this pandemic and the economic crisis that is happening because of it, that they all have the right to vote, that they all have access to vote. Young people, people who are first-time voters, people who don't vote often, who are seeing the consequences of who is in office and understanding, like, I really need to get more involved in this process, and that, maybe they've never voted before, maybe they haven't voted in a long time. They need to have access and be able to ask questions in person. Assemblymember Berman and Senator Umberg are both legislators who chair the elections committees in either the Assembly and the Senate and the state Senate. They have both introduced legislation. Assemblymember Berman has introduced AB 860, and that requires all voters to receive a vote by mail ballot. Senator Umberg has introduced SB 423, and that bill requires county elections officials to require and maintain a minimum number of polling places and vote centers, both for the November 2020 election. So now is the time to make your needs heard to those two legislators and make sure that the legislative action that follows will consider all of those things.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And before I move on to Mindy, I just want to say we will extend the time of this panel a little bit because we started a little late. I want to ask the panelists to be able to provide some final comments as well as entertain some questions from our audience. So Mindy, many of our audiences right now also do a lot of civic engagement work, are very active politically in their communities, but have also probably not lived at a time where the political and social challenges to voting are just enormous. So if you could take us a little back into history a bit, and has there ever been a time where there's a situation like this that faces the electorate, and what are the lessons that we can learn from them that we can deploy to the experience that we're going to have in November?
Sure. Well, quite clearly, I think the most comparable, I guess, situation would be the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Not exactly the same situation, and of course, the death count and the magnitude of impact on society was, at this point at least, far greater, and we hope that ends up being the case when history is written. But it did have significant impacts on that election, both in terms of the ability of candidates across the country, including the presidential candidates and Woodrow Wilson, to be able to get out amongst voters and to hold rallies and to spread their message, but also on election day, as we were facing kind of a second wave, only the hardest hitting wave of the pandemic in that fall period. So going into October and November, out here in the West Coast, we were being hit really hard, and we had, I think in Sacramento, a number of polling places had to close. It's been widely reported. We had other places up and down the West Coast, San Francisco most notably, requiring masks or some sort of facial covering. Other areas of the country were in kind of different phases. They were beginning to open up, where we were kind of starting to close, at least around the election, a little bit more. But the bottom line is that voters had to be encouraged to participate. I think there was a strong sense that voters wanted to participate. We were nearing the end of the World War I, of course, but still there was a lot of fear, as there was fear generally in society, and that's where it parallels now, right? And what we did see was, after that election, we saw some outbreaks across the country, which at least to some degree were blamed on the election and people going to the polls. And then the bottom line is we saw an impact on turnout. To this day, we'll never know exactly what that impact was directly from the Spanish flu and the fears around the Spanish flu, people not being able to go or people being fearful about going and getting ill. But turnout, I think, was about 10 percentage points lower than the previous midterm. And so there was some sort of impact, we believe, to have occurred. Now, if I may, I'm just going to fast forward, though, to now. Just the panelists have all been fantastic, and you've all hit on so many really important topics and important points about kind of what we're facing in November. Maybe I'll just kind of touch on a couple more points or kind of reiterate maybe another way of thinking about it. I just want to emphasize that as we go into November, we really are facing the potential that we could have lower turnout than we would have already or normally have expected. So many of us coming off of the 2018 election, as Jared already mentioned, coming off of even the primary, we're expecting to have high turnout in November. All signs were pointing to that. I'm a elections researcher, and so we had good reason to believe that. And I think now, quite frankly, we're facing the potential of having, at least not meeting what we had thought we would get to. And none of us really know exactly what turnout's going to be. But maybe not reaching historically high. I didn't think we would see a record, but historically high numbers in November, and we might be seeing something different. There could be a positive impact on turnout in some way unknown if people rally around kind of for instance, our leaders' performance around COVID-19, and that could boost in some ways to turnout. But putting that aside, in terms of what we normally would expect, I am deeply concerned about turnout. And that means here in California as well, as we have a much greater percentage of our population, of our potential voting population, right, that are always, no matter what kind of impact what type of historical situation or kind of election context we're looking at, we know that historically underrepresented groups, so Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, young people, for instance, those with language access needs, the list goes on, voters with disabilities, all tend to be disproportionately impacted when we have challenges in an election. And I'm deeply concerned that that's what's going to happen here now. And to talk about the vote by mail aspect, I think is really important, and I'm really glad that Melissa brought it up. The governor did put forth the executive order on Friday, It's really important that in section 2 of that everybody knows that in section 2 of that executive order, it actually says that nothing in that order shall, and I'm going to read it here, shall be construed to limit the extent to which in-person voting opportunities are made available in connection with the election. So the governor has not made any call on what in-person voting should look like. And I've already interpretation saying, oh, we're moving to an all vote by mail election. And maybe an assumption that either it's dangerous, right, for media to say that we're not really having an in-person election, or an assumption that it's greatly reduced. I know what's going to happen, but we're all working right now, still legally, right, with all of the legal expectations and requirements around putting on an in-person experience. So that means in a polling place county, one polling place for every 1,000 registered voters, right? Again, what we've always had. In a vote center county, one for every 10,000 registered voters. It's a 4-day vote center. And there's a debate and discussion across the state, depending on who you talk to, in terms of what those in-person experiences should be and can be. So Melissa, of course, talked about wanting her organization fighting passionately for no changes at all to those ratios. So an expectation that we will not limit in-person options, that we have to make them safe. That's, everybody agrees to that. We have to have personal protective equipment. We have to have social distancing, but a strong desire and holding the line at not limiting those in-person voting experiences. To other groups, advocacy groups that have come up with a number kind of a little bit different, all the way to the CACO, if you don't know them, that's the California Association of Elected Officials, Clerks and Officials, and they're the professional organization for election officials. And they have formally put out a letter to the governor and the legislature asking for, to be relieved of those legal requirements and to be given discretion about how many polling place and vote center sites they are required. So no longer, right, based on their population potentially. So this is an important conversation for everyone to track. And the bottom line is that, and my center and others have done research around this. We know that there are disparities, or at least differences in how Californians use vote by mail. We are a large vote by mail use state. About 2/3 of our electorate in recent elections uses vote by mail ballots. But a good chunk of those don't get sent through the mail. They actually get dropped off at a polling place or vote center, or potentially a drop box if you have one. If you're in a vote center county, of course you have drop boxes. There's real reasons why voters choose to vote in person. There's real reasons why voters who are using a mail ballot still want to drop it off. We've done research to show that particularly voters of color have less trust in the USPS system, postal system, that ballot is going to get safely to the election office of, in their county. And so they want to see it safely put in that box. There's other reasons why they want to drop it off in person, want to ask last minute questions, want to ask if they've done it right, did they seal it right? And for people that vote in person, it's not just a preference thing that they can easily switch. Some maybe, yes, but we've done a lot of research to show that there are, again, real needs for why people vote in person. Sometimes it is a preference in the sense that, but it's real, that they want to and need to have that social experience. They want to be seen, they want to represent their community. For others, it's because they need language access help. Maybe they need to use accessible voting machines or voter with disabilities. They want to ask questions, right, of the process to feel more comfortable and confident. They want to see their ballot that they filled out, right, go into that box and know that it's going to be immediately counted and doesn't have to be verified later like a vote by mail ballot does. So all of those things are really important. And that's why I think we're tracking closely to understand, as policy has changed, what are the impacts going to be in those changes on particularly voters of color, low-income voters, communities that historically are underrepresented, younger voters, and so on. So I'll leave it there, but we know there are policy, we're a nonpartisan research center, but we know there are significant policy outcomes that affect, actual races and who wins and who doesn't. But I'm talking about simply representation and access to voting and feeling comfortable and confident. And that's the last thing I'll just mention too. We do see a greater level of distrust, period, in our electoral system and in our leaders. The era of COVID doesn't help at all, I think, around voting, because if people are additionally uncertain or uneasy about how they're going to cast their ballot, not only for their own health, but how their ballot is going to get counted, that could potentially also impact somebody's likelihood of voting, and that can have a disproportionate impact, right, hurting some groups more than others. So just to think about that, and I'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mindy. So as we begin to wrap this up, I want to go back to the earlier speakers to just provide some final comments, but also note of hope, because I know that many of our communities, but also just progressive communities in California are just concerned about how we're going to navigate all of these challenges. So I wanted to go back to you, Angelica, you know, your years of doing this work and having seen so many things and challenges that communities have faced. What is your final message to our audience, and how can they actually engage with your organization in the ways that they can, given that, you know, we have audiences that also are interested to rewatch this conversation in a recording later, and just to tell you all that it is being recorded and you can go back to the resources that our panelists have shared. Angelica?
Sure. Well, many of the organizations that are here today actually are doing the work on the ground. And so for maybe your organization doesn't have an electoral program, civic engagement program of this type, I would say it would be great to just list out all the organizations that are going to be participating with major Get Out the Vote campaigns, and be connected as volunteers, as phone bankers. I think that's what we're going to need. We're really going to expand the number of people that we need, and then that we also are able to provide individuals with some critical information about some of the critical issues that are up before the as ballot initiatives, and also on specific, you know, what I would say races, whether it's in the C-Force element, you know. And so, but right now I just do really want to say, for all of us who are doing this work, we have to just make sure more participation. The stakes are high. And so that's our call to action. You can volunteer at Cheerla, and you can go to our website and connect with our civic engagement program if you wish to volunteer.
Thank you. Jared?
Yeah, I would say for us to not mourn, but to organize, right? There's no other option than to keep, you know, moving forward. I think one of the things that I think is exciting about this moment is, look, in the political sphere, people like to use mailers and they use TV ads and radio ads and digital, and all that is important about what we do. But I feel like the real nuts and bolts tools of relational kind of one-on-one organizing are as important now as they ever have been. And all of the groups that are here are experts in that, way more than, you know, the political strategists out there. The other thing that I would say is that there are a whole range of relational organizing tools that have come online that I think are really exciting. So things like Outvote, things like Team. There's a tool that we're using called Outreach Circle, which makes it much easier to engage in our networks. It's just tools that did not exist a couple of years ago. I'm kind of obsessed with these things, so I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. But I think that we have tools now that allow us to capture all of the conversations that used to live on flip charts and in our phones and in our notebooks and Excel spreadsheets and all that stuff. So I would encourage people to look at some of those tools too.
Melissa?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I would leave with, you know, I want everyone to know that when it comes to voter access, when it comes to accessibility of our elections, that we are with you, we are fighting for you. We have been working nonstop, countless hours over the past 2 months with organizations like Cheerla, like SCIU, with so many others that represent communities and represent, you know, incredible work and incredible missions. We're fighting for your rights to vote. We're fighting for your access to voting. And now is the time to reach out to Assemblymember Berman, Senator Umberg, the Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, as well as Governor Gavin Newsom, to express your needs for your communities when it comes to voting by mail, when it comes to in-person voting, when it comes to public education and outreach. Now is the time to make those needs heard. And I would also just put out a call to action for the younger folks that are on this call that are listening, because we're gonna need you to sign up to be poll workers. A lot of poll workers are typically in the elderly population, and those folks are at risk of contracting COVID-19 and getting really serious conditions because of it. And we need to protect our elders. We need to stand up and fill in that need because we are going to need poll workers. We are also fighting to make sure that poll workers have the proper protective gear, compensation, hazard pay, to make sure that poll workers are not putting their health on the line, and that they're compensated for their work. So I would just put out that call to action as well for the younger folks.
And off to you, Mindy.
And that's an excellent point. You know, really, I defer to everyone else here. You guys are on the ground, you know, your communities. I think it's just to reiterate the challenges that are ahead of us. It's not at all to suggest to throw in the towel. It's just the opposite. It's to understand, keep yourselves informed about all of these policy choices that are happening right now and how they can impact your communities. Advocate for what you believe is right. I don't need to tell anybody that, but just to, they're kind of coming at us all fast and furious. And we do know that, I will say, maybe I'll leave it with this. Depending on what the governor orders and how specific it is and how much discretion is still left to registrars, we could very well see different kinds of situations in different counties. And certainly the challenges that each county are facing, and we didn't talk about this, but very much, but it's that the reason why we're talking about potentially limiting the number of polling places, or at least some are talking about doing that. It's not just because of voters, maybe fewer voters might be coming to polling places. It's because poll workers, volunteer poll workers and volunteer sites, locations are pulling back at huge rates, at least right now, as we're understanding. But things could change between now and November, and every county will be different. So to make sure you understand the policy, you know, as we're all trying to struggle to keep up on the policy changes and the realities and the differences across counties, I think is going to be really important. Where some counties maybe that challenge is not as hard and it'd be much easier for them to keep to those legal minimums, and other counties may be facing and need some support and maybe need all of our help to rally and to bring volunteers and to bring locations to kind of make it even easier. Not that you guys have, you know, nothing else to do, but unfortunately part of the equation is that counties will need volunteers, young poll workers, they need sites. They need all of that as well, and that's part of the challenges too. But thank you all for your amazing work, and thanks for letting me be on this call today with all of you.
And thank you for this amazing panel. A few questions have come in, and I want to make sure that while we're time limited, some of those get addressed, even if it's just reconnecting with folks who asked the question. I will not be able to take all of them and flag them for you, but one seems to be needing more of the outreach tools that you just described, Jared. Is there a way to get them to the participants? If we can facilitate that, because we do have the information of the delegates to this event, maybe you can send it to us, but hopefully that is possible, Jared?
Yeah, I would say the two that I would recommend people can just do some research on was, one is called Outvote, which is a great tool. The other one that we're using is called Outreach Circle. For most of these, if you reach out to them, you can set up a demo pretty quickly. There's also the third one I would say is called Team. So those three I think have a lot of promise. I would reach out to them and set up a demo, and they can walk you through it. The organizers can, I don't know if my email is with the bio that's up with this, but I'm happy to talk to people about what our experience has been too. Just shoot me an email.
Yeah, we also send it to the chat group. The other question that came to me privately is, how are your organizations making space for very vulnerable populations like the differently abled? You know, are there opportunities for them to also fully engage? And anybody can take this at this point. Angelica?
I can say that. So we've had very, consistently individuals who are wheelchair bound, who are very much, they are heroes in our call center, but they also individuals with limited eyesight. There's so many ways. And I think this is a moment of creativity, but it's also a moment of inclusion and creativity and inclusion. So I think this is a moment where everybody is necessary in order for us to win what we deserve.
Thank you. And I'll get the last question, and then I'll hand it over to Carmen. The final one is from Nancy Cunningham. Is there a way to prioritize these various problems with voting so we can know which efforts will likely have the greatest payoff? It's a bit of an existential question, but I'll leave it to this panel to answer that. Is there a way to prioritize them?
I would, I saw somebody note, I think in the text box about volunteering as a poll worker in the last election, and there just not being any of the gear or the distancing that was needed. We can have regulations that are out there, and we can have like a code of conduct from the governor, but I do think it's going to really depend county by county. So the good thing is we have a lot of time between now and November. I would kind of encourage people to reach out to the registrar office in your local county. And I know that like our union has been doing a lot of these Zoom check-ins with members of Congress and Assembly and Senate. I don't think it would take much to kind of do that, because I think it's going to be, the devil's going to be in the details, right? Like we need to get nuts and bolts about, if we have these locations, how many are they going to be? What's the PPE there? What's the spacing going to be like? And how are we going to communicate to the public that it's safe to go out and vote in person?
Can I just add something there too? Jared, you bring up a really good point. We do have time, but in some areas we don't. And I know you know this too, I'm sure, but the policy decisions are being made now, but also things like, when it comes to the administrative side of things at the county level, registrars are telling everyone in the field right now that they're making these decisions now, or at least in the next month or so. They have to put in their orders for the number of vote by mail ballots, for instance. So they needed to know whether we were sending everybody vote by mail ballots, ordering equipment to try to process all of these ballots. And right now, and a really important point, of course, as we get closer, outreach will rev up. There is no money that is allocated at this point, and we hope there will be to some degree, significant degree, but there's no money allocated for all the outreach that's going to be absolutely needed. And all of you know how absolutely important and key, and how no matter how great the work that you do, you always feel completely under resource, right, to do the outreach that is needed in communities that are historically underrepresented in our communities. But this election, it's going to be, we can't underestimate the amount of outreach that's going to be needed because of this significant change. There will be voters that just will not get the message about the change in terms of the vote by mail ballot, and they will show up on election day. I know you know this, and I'm concerned because all of you are going to be struggling to do this work with not the resources that you need. And when you partner with counties, they're not going to have the resources that they need if you do partner with your election officials. So part of that advocacy also is advocating and demanding, I would suggest, just because we've done a lot of research in California to show that the disparities, based on participation, advocating and asking for actual money for outreach to come along with all of these policy changes wherever possible, because we're going to lose voters along the way that will never get the message, even if they wanted to and could transition to a vote by mail ballot. So I just want to emphasize that too.
Great. All right. I'm afraid that is all the time that we have. We've gotten a lot of interest to volunteer with your organization. So hopefully that opportunity is available. On behalf of CIPC, I would really like to thank this amazing panel, and hopefully our audiences can continue to engage beyond Immigrant Day. Thank you so much for your time. As a reminder, this is both live on Zoom with our delegates as well as on Facebook Live. So you have the audience hopefully paying attention to all of the lessons that we've heard today. Thank you again, everybody. And I am going to hand it over back to you, Carmen.